For the first time in a century, Earth bowed its pride and sent a plea to the Galactic Council, not for war, dominance, or territory, but for something far more desperate: help. Because a cosmic plague had erupted across human colonies like a storm made of shadows, spreading through stations, ships, and entire settlements with impossible speed, killing without pattern, mutating beyond logic, and leaving even the greatest Terran scientists stunned. Earth's brightest minds on Mars, Europa, Titan, and the Lagrange labs all tried to study the pathogen, but every scan returned the same terrifying result: unknown origin. A phrase humanity had not seen since the early days of space exploration, and outbreaks followed no rules, infecting children who never left their homes, engineers in sealed suits, soldiers on isolated bases, and even AI systems began reporting errors they couldn't explain, causing panic to ripple across the Terran network. But even in this darkness, humanity did not give up, and so Earth decided to beg the only power with technology far ahead of theirs. The only power that could analyze something so ancient and strange: the Galactic Council. With hope and desperation tied together like a trembling knot, the Earth ambassador, Dr. Rowan Hale, walked into the council chamber carrying a transparent data crystal that held every reading, every scan, every horrifying progression of the plague, and the chamber glowed with gold light reflecting off towering pillars and floating banners of alien empires that ruled hundreds of star systems. Thousands of delegates sat in their elevated seats, wearing shimmering robes, polished armor, and symbols of power, each one watching Rowan as if he were an insect crawling into a royal palace. But Rowan didn't care about their stares. He cared about the billions depending on him. So he took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice steady but tired, explaining to the council that humans were dying, colonies falling, ships infected, and that the pathogen behaved like no known organism recorded in any race's archives. He explained how humanity had quarantined entire sectors, shut down travel, turned warships into floating emergency hospitals, and how even AI systems were malfunctioning in ways no one could predict. He told them of children lost, of doctors fighting without sleep, of soldiers dying without firing a weapon, and his voice cracked when he said the words humanity had never spoken before: "We cannot do this alone." For a moment, the chamber fell silent. A cold, still silence. Rowan glanced up, hope flickering in his eyes. Maybe the galaxy would finally stand with Earth. Maybe old alliances still meant something. Maybe billions wouldn't die for nothing. But then a low chuckle echoed from the Vorath delegate, a tall reptilian creature with glowing red eyes, and the laughter spread like contamination. First a few chuckles, then dozens, then hundreds, until the entire council chamber thundered with cruel amusement, as if Rowan had told a joke rather than pleaded for billions of lives. Rowan stood frozen, humiliation flooding his chest as delegates whispered and mocked. Humans exaggerate everything. Weak species always beg. If they can't handle their own sickness, let them die out. They think they're important enough for us to care. And one ambassador leaned forward with a smirk and said, "Let the humans deal with their own mess. We are not their protectors." The words hit Rowan like a blade to the heart, but he tried again, raising his voice to warn them the plague could mutate, that it might not remain within human biology, that they were playing with fire. But before he could speak further, the council chairwoman lifted her hand and muted his microphone, silencing him instantly. "We have heard enough," she said coldly. "The council does not exist to babysit lesser species." And the entire chamber erupted into applause, actual applause, like Rowan had been defeated in a debate instead of begging for the survival of his people. He stood there, helpless, alone, humiliated in front of the galaxy, knowing he had to return to Earth with nothing but shame and despair. He stepped out of the chamber with slow, heavy steps, the grand hallways feeling colder than ice, lined with alien guards who didn't even look at him. He opened his communicator, connecting to Earth Command, and millions of humans watched the live broadcast, hoping for even a small victory. But Rowan could only whisper the truth: they refused. And the silence that followed was deeper than grief, because in that silence were dying colonies, children gasping for breath, doctors holding the hands of soldiers fading away, entire settlements being sealed forever. Then Rowan added, voice trembling, "They laughed at us." And humanity let out a collective breath of disbelief and pain, screens flickering with agony across all Terran sectors. That night, something changed, not in anger, not in noise, but in silence, because across the farthest human colonies, Communication servers began shutting down one by one, not from infection, but from choice. Humans withdrew from council channels, closed their embassies, recalled their ships from alien space, and every Terran transmission fell quiet, like a species closing its eyes before a storm. Nearby alien outposts reported strange behavior, Terran ships avoiding contact, long-range human satellites going dark, research labs locking down with no explanation, patrols doubling in number but not answering calls, and the younger alien species laughed, thinking humans were sulking, calling them dramatic, emotional, fragile. But the older species, the ones who remembered the ancient human wars, the ones with scars carved by Terran fire and Terran honor, they whispered in trembling fear, humans only go silent when they are preparing. On council worlds, analysts watched human activity shifting in ways they had never seen. Patterns tightening, movements becoming calculated, colonies withdrawing like an army pulling back before a counterstrike. And though the council dismissed it all as panic, old war veterans felt dread rising like ancient instinct waking from sleep. Deep in the Terran High Command bunker beneath Antarctica, generals gathered around holographic displays of the plague, of dying colonies, of the councils. Mocking faces, and the room filled with a cold, unified rage that hummed behind every breath. One general whispered, "If the galaxy won't stand with us," and another finished, "Then we stand alone." And in that moment, something ancient awakened in humanity. Not war, not hatred, but the old Terran resolve, the one coded into their species from Earth's darkest ages, the one that whispered, "If we cannot rely on others, we will become strong enough that we never need to." The plague still raged, colonies still burned, but humanity felt something shift, something rise, something harden, and a silent message spread through the Terran network like a heartbeat made of steel. Stand together. Stand strong. Stand alone if we must. And the galaxy, still laughing, still mocking, still blind, had no idea that tonight was the night humans stood back up, and once humans stand up, the galaxy learns to kneel. The galaxy expected humans to cry, protest, beg again, or attempt another diplomatic plea, but instead something far more terrifying happened. Humanity went silent, not the silence of weakness but the silence of calculation. The silence ancient species once feared when humans were still carving their name into the stars. Through raw determination, and as the cosmic plague kept spreading deeper into Terran colonies, entire sectors began to lock themselves down with a discipline no other species could match. Research stations sealing their doors, mining bases shutting off external lights, outposts on Pluto dropping completely off the grid, Lunar Command cutting all outgoing broadcasts, and Earth itself entering a global blackout mode where even regular citizens agreed to restrict transmissions to emergency channels only. Alien observers stationed near Terran borders reported strange coordinated movements. Human ships moving with surgical precision, medical convoys escorted by silent warships, drones spreading across dead zones like a shifting steel cloud, and long-range scans picking up Terran stealth signatures that disappeared the moment anyone tried to track them, while the Council misinterpreted all of this as panic, laughing that humans were retreating into fear, calling them dramatic, emotional creatures who couldn't handle a crisis without crying for help. But the older species, those who remembered the last time humans went silent, felt something cold crawl up their spines. Meanwhile in the Terran High Command bunker, buried beneath miles of reinforced alloy under Antarctica's ice, the atmosphere was thick with grief, anger, and resolve as generals. Scientists, commanders, and survivors gathered around holographic projections of infected colonies flickering red like dying stars, their faces heavy with exhaustion but their eyes burning with purpose. And when Earth's president appeared on the screen, voice raw but steady, he didn't speak like a politician but like a soldier giving his people a final stand order, saying, "We will no longer ask the galaxy for help. We save ourselves or we die as humans." And the room erupted not with applause, but with a unified silence that felt like steel forming. The plague continued mutating, its infection patterns becoming more unpredictable, yet Terran scientists did not rest. They quadrupled their efforts, merging military research with civilian labs, connecting AI cores to medical systems, taking risks no council scientist ever would, because humans did not fear dying, they feared giving up. Entire colonies volunteered themselves as controlled quarantine zones to help gather data. Doctors from Earth boarded plague-ridden ships knowing they might not return, and soldiers stood guard outside infected cities to ensure containment even if it meant sacrificing themselves. All without complaint because humanity had decided that if the galaxy would not stand with them, then they would fight alone until their last breath, and slowly, silently, something began to change. AI Athena Prime discovered anomalous signals buried deep within the pathogen. Signals that looked almost manufactured, as if the plague wasn't natural at all. When Athena transmitted her findings to Terran Command, the room froze, because the plague's molecular structure resembled technology seen only in the archives of ancient Council species, meaning the Council might have known something humans didn't, and possibly even feared the same plague in their forgotten history. Now fury began to grow beneath humanity's grief, not loud rage, but a cold, sharp fury that tightened the air like a drawn bowstring, because it became clear the Council didn't refuse to help out of ignorance. They refused to admit they recognized the threat. On Council worlds, analysts finally noticed human activity shifting into military patterns. Colonies forming grid-like defensive perimeters, ships moving along encrypted routes, Terran AI networks going fully dark, and blackouts appearing in sectors known to house Terran prototypes. Yet Council leaders dismissed these warnings with arrogance, saying, "Humans are weak. We've seen their capabilities. They cannot do anything without us." But soldiers who once fought against human fleets decades ago began whispering again, "They are preparing." Because this silence was not fear, but focus. Every passing day increased the gap between Terran and Council understanding. Aliens thought humans were collapsing, but in truth humanity was reorganizing like a massive organism redistributing strength to its wounded parts, and the weight of that unified silence began to ripple through space itself. Alien traders noticed Terran patrol ships no longer communicated but still escorted every convoy. Spies reported human labs producing strange energy bursts. Border colonies claimed to see enormous shadows moving behind planets. Scanning drones detected faint signatures of megastructures awakening in places humans never used before. And every time the Council demanded an explanation, their messages went unanswered, bouncing back with a cold, clinical reply, "Terran channels unavailable." The galaxy laughed at first, but as days passed, the laughter died, replaced by unease, then confusion, then fear, because humans did not protest their humiliation, did not argue, did not retaliate, did not even complain. They simply became quiet, efficient, organized, united, and submerged themselves into a silence so heavy that even alien empires felt it closing around them like a storm approaching from the horizon. And somewhere deep inside every species with memory older than their arrogance, an ancient truth resurfaced like a nightmare. Humans only break when they're alone. But humans only rise when they're abandoned. And when they rise, the galaxy trembles as the plague worsened across human territories and communication silence deepened. Strange movements began unfolding in the darkest corners of space. Movements so subtle yet so coordinated that only the oldest and most experienced observers noticed something was off. Because while the Council dismissed humanity as a collapsing species, border patrols and deep space sensors started detecting faint, irregular signals drifting through abandoned sectors. Sharp bursts of Terran encryption, unusually large gravitational ripples near dead star systems, sudden spikes of energy where no star, ship, or station existed, and drifting shadows that vanished before scanners could lock onto them. At first these reports were brushed aside as glitches caused by human desperation. But the anomalies kept growing, asteroids shifting unnaturally, patrol ships recording glimpses of dormant megastructures reactivating, ancient Terran relay stations flickering. With life for the first time in centuries, and long-lost mining colonies suddenly broadcasting encrypted signals that no Council AI could decode. Then came the incident that truly shook the galaxy. When a Kel scout ship passed near the Necron Expanse, an area believed to be a dead zone with no stars, no planets, and no life, their scanners picked up something massive, but distorted, as if the object was cloaked or bending space around itself. And when the crew zoomed in using manual visualization, they froze in terror because the silhouette revealed the unmistakable shape of a Terran structure, not a ship, not a station, but a colossal ring-like machine that seemed to pulse faintly like a beating heart. Its outer layer etched with symbols older than human civilization. Symbols that looked eerily similar to the ancient plague records some species kept hidden from public archives. The scout captain panicked and ordered a retreat. But before the ship could jump away, their engine systems were overridden by an unknown signal, forcing the ship into a complete halt. Not disabled, not damaged, just frozen. And a single Terran-coded phrase appeared on every screen: "Do not approach." No attack followed, no threat, no explosion, yet the chilling simplicity of the warning was enough to send the crew fleeing in silence once control returned. When the report reached the Council, they dismissed it as Terran paranoia. But the older species recognized the significance immediately. Humans were guarding something enormous, something they did not want the galaxy to see. Meanwhile, across human-controlled space, deployment patterns shifted with terrifying precision. Terran fleets that normally moved slowly and predictably were now relocating at impossible speeds, using routes no one knew existed. Civilian cargo ships altered their paths into tight systematic grids, creating silent corridors no alien dared to enter. Deep space drones disappeared into void sectors and stopped transmitting entirely, as if fully absorbed into a hidden Terran network. Even the stars seemed different around human borders, with light bending strangely, and any ship that tried to scan too deeply either lost connection or received corrupted data that made no sense. Yet the most frightening sign of all was the sudden activation of the old relays. Titanic pillars built ages ago when humanity first expanded into space, structures so ancient that even humans had stopped using them centuries earlier, but now they were humming with quiet energy, sending coded pulses into the void. Like beacons awakening after a long sleep, and those pulses began syncing with similar activations across scattered colonies, forming a pattern only the very oldest species recognized. A war formation, not one meant for attack but for containment, defense, and absolute quarantine. It became obvious to anyone paying attention that humanity was preparing for something far bigger than the plague, something the Council refused to acknowledge. The galaxy's civilians began whispering behind closed doors, frightened by Terran silence and movements they couldn't explain, and even Council soldiers, trained to dismiss fear, felt their instincts tighten when they saw Terran ships maintaining perfect formation while not transmitting a single signal. They moved like a single organism with a single mind, like wolves circling a forest long before stepping out to strike, and that primal terror spread even among species who didn't believe in fear. Council analysts still tried to mock the situation, calling humans irrational, calling their silence dramatic, calling their movements chaotic, but deep down, even they felt a creeping dread each time a Terran fleet vanished from long-range scans or each time a dormant human outpost lit up with new energy signatures. And when the Vorath Empire received a distress call from one of their deep space beacons, just 3 words: something is moving. Before the beacon went offline permanently, many species finally understood the truth. Humans were mobilizing, not collapsing, organizing, not panicking, preparing, not retreating. Because the silence was not weakness, the silence was coordination. And the galaxy, for the first time, began to fear that the humans who once begged for help were now preparing to stand up, and when humans stand up, they do not rise alone. They rise together, and nothing in the galaxy rises with that kind of unity. The galaxy had just begun whispering about Terran silence when the first true sign of human retaliation struck. Not with explosions, not with fleets firing, not with war cries, but with something far more terrifying: absolute precision and total control. Because on a quiet morning across the galactic core, dozens of Council communication satellites suddenly flickered, glitched, and then went completely dead one after another like candles snatched away by invisible hands, starting with minor relay stations, then mid-level command nodes, then long-range deep space transmitters, until entire sectors went blind, unable to contact their own outposts or ships, causing frantic scrambling across Council worlds as technicians shouted, soldiers ran, generals demanded status updates, and engineers tried desperately to reboot systems that refused to turn back on. They swore it was a solar flare, a cosmic anomaly, a system overload. But then someone finally pulled up the archived footage from the moments just before the first satellite went dark, and every single person watching it felt their blood freeze because the video clearly showed a small Terran probe gliding silently beside the satellite, pausing for exactly 1 second before disconnecting it from the galaxy's most secure communication network, not hacking, not damaging, not breaking, just turning it off like a parent switching off a child's toy. And when the engineers zoomed in further, they saw the probe had no weapons, no technology the galaxy recognized, nothing that suggested aggression, just a tiny emblem etched into its side, the old Terran symbol for do not interfere. Panic spread like fire. The Council called emergency meetings, ambassadors shouted at each other, demanding answers. How did humans get into our network? How did they bypass the encryption? Why weren't we warned they had this capability? But the answers only made everything worse. They didn't hack the satellites. They already understood them, every layer, every circuit, every weakness, because humanity had helped design those satellites centuries ago. Yet the Council never believed humans were smart enough to hide a backdoor the galaxy could never detect. Then the second wave hit. Warships across 4 different empires suddenly lost the ability to jump, their engines locking in place mid-procedure, leaving admirals stunned as. Their ships drifted helplessly because no matter how hard they tried, the systems simply refused to obey, and panic turned into horror when the ship's screens began displaying a new message, not in alien script, not in Council code, but in the cold, steel-blue text of Terran command protocols, unauthorized access, Terran priority sequence active, do not interfere. ***, Captain screamed. We are being hacked. Shut it down. Take back control. But it didn't matter. Terran override shut every attempt down as politely and effortlessly as a teacher correcting a child's drawing. Even worse, no human ships were present in any of these areas. No fleets, no fighters, no visible activity. Meaning humanity had triggered something remotely, something vast, something they prepared long before the Council mocked their plea. And then came the moment that shook the galaxy to its core. In the Central Council Defense Grid, the most secure and advanced system in known space, the entire system rebooted itself without warning, flickered violently, and then all screens illuminated with a single Terran message that echoed like a ghost in the silent chamber. We asked for help. You laughed. We warned you. You ignored. This is your first reminder. No threats. No demands. Just a reminder. That was all it took for fear to flood the galaxy. Council soldiers whispered prayers under their breath. Ambassadors trembled as they realized humanity had not attacked. They had simply demonstrated control, showing the galaxy what they could do if pushed further. Entire fleets hung frozen in the void, communications dead, engines offline, world-to-world channels cut off, and for the first time in centuries, the mighty Galactic Council felt fragile, vulnerable, powerless. Yet the most terrifying part was that humans still hadn't spoken. Not a single official response, not a broadcast, not a statement, only silent, precise actions that felt more threatening than any war ever fought. Because silence meant confidence, silence meant control, silence meant humanity had stopped asking and started deciding. In deep space observation stations, aged alien scientists whispered the old prophecy once repeated long before the Council was formed. When humans speak, they negotiate. When humans shout, they fight. But when humans fall silent, run. And now the galaxy finally understood. Earth was no longer pleading. Earth was no longer waiting. Earth had stood up, and the Council had no idea what was coming next. The real panic began the moment every major Council fleet across the galaxy lost control at the exact same second. Because starships that were built with billions of credits, ships that were protected by layered quantum encryption, ships the galaxy bragged about as unhackable, suddenly froze mid-flight like statues suspended in space, their engines shutting down without overheating, their jump drives locking without error. Codes, their shields collapsing without alarms, leaving admirals, captains, and entire crews staring in horror at panels that no longer responded. And as soldiers scrambled, shouting frantic reports and slamming commands that never activated, the screens on every bridge flickered with cold blue light, replacing all controls with a single, unchanging Terran phrase, system priority shift, control transferred. At first, commanders assumed it was sabotage, a virus, a rogue AI, anything but the truth, because the truth was too terrifying to accept. But when technicians traced the override signal, they found its source was not inside their ship, not even inside their sector. It was coming from deep within Terran space, meaning humanity had just taken control of thousands of alien warships without sending a single vessel of their own. Panic rippled like electricity, admirals screaming for backup, for alternative routes, for emergency protocols, but even emergency overrides had been disabled, replaced by a single warning: unauthorized interference will cause system damage. It wasn't a threat, it was a guarantee, spoken with the quiet confidence of someone who understood your ship better than you did. And on worlds across the galaxy, civilians looked up at their skies with trembling fear as planetary defense cannons, border shields, orbital lasers, and anti-ship platforms all shut down simultaneously. going dark in perfect sync like billions of lights extinguished by an invisible hand. And no matter how hard engineers tried to restore them, every system responded. With the same Terran phrase, "Stand down." The council chamber filled with chaos, ambassadors screaming that humanity had declared war, demanding retaliation, calling for emergency fleets. But there were no fleets left to call because every major armada in the galaxy was dead in space. Every ship a prisoner inside its own hull, every weapon disabled, every communication grid silenced, and the realization hit them like a meteor: humans had not attacked, demanding anything, but Rowan simply waited until the noise died down. Then he whispered, "Yes, we knew it would. And we tried to warn you." Shock, terror, regret washed over the council as Rowan added, not with anger but with unbearable truth. "You mocked a disaster you did not understand." Every ambassador lowered their eyes, trembling, knowing the plague spreading among their planets was the result of their arrogance. Finally, the council chairwoman, her voice shaking, whispered, "What do you want from us?" Rowan turned his back to the chamber for a moment, watching the projections of his own people. Human doctors working tirelessly, human children recovering, human soldiers carrying supplies, human scientists fighting for strangers, before turning back with a voice that carried not hatred, but a wounded dignity. "We do not want revenge. We want respect." His next words thundered through the chamber like judgment itself. "We will cure your worlds. We will save your people. But this time, you will listen." Delegates stared at him with wide, terrified eyes as Rowan finished with a sentence that would be etched into galactic history forever. "Humanity stood alone because you forced us to. Now we stand above you because we had no choice." ***, and as the council trembled, watching the human man who stood taller than their entire empire, they finally understood that this was no longer diplomacy, no longer negotiation. This was the moment the galaxy realized humanity didn't need permission to rise. They only needed a reason. The moment the council accepted that their survival now depended entirely on humanity, space itself seemed to shift as sensors across the galaxy lit up with alarms, detecting incoming mass unlike anything ever recorded, and at first, terrified ambassadors believed it was the plague evolving again. But their fear turned into something far more overwhelming when the darkness beyond the council's homeworld split open like a cosmic curtain being torn away, revealing silhouettes so massive they blocked entire constellations, and every species watching felt their hearts stop because the shapes weren't asteroids or anomalies. They were ships, Terran ships, thousands of them, emerging from sectors the galaxy believed were empty, each warship moving with such silent discipline that even machines struggled to track their formation. These were not the small, familiar human vessels the council used to mock. These were titanic dreadnoughts, stealth cruisers wider than cities, carriers shaped like drifting fortresses, every hull jet black, absorbing starlight, carrying no logos, no colors, no banners, nothing except the cold, calm presence of absolute power. The Terran fleet formed a perfect ring around the council's homeworld, no gaps, no stagger, no hesitation, just a silent circle of giants watching from the void. And the sight shattered whatever arrogance the council still had left because the ships didn't approach, didn't activate weapons, didn't broadcast a threat. They simply existed, and their existence alone felt like judgment. On the surface, civilians screamed as the sky dimmed under the shadow of ships so large their outlines swallowed the horizon, and yet not one human vessel powered a weapon, because the message was clear. Humanity didn't need violence to dominate, they only needed presence. In the council chamber, ambassadors rushed to windows, trembling with a primal fear their species had forgotten, while old veterans fell to their knees as memories long buried resurfaced. Stories of ancient Terran war tactics, the kind that didn't begin with explosions but with silence, alignment, formation, all signs of a species preparing for something monumental. Then the largest dreadnought drifted forward, a colossal black arrowhead with a surface so smooth it looked like space itself was bending around it. And a deep vibration echoed through every ship, every screen, every city, and every living being as a single message flashed across the galaxy. "We did not come to destroy. We came to be seen." The words shook entire civilizations, because they realized humans could have wiped out the Council's world in less time than it took to blink. But instead humanity chose to show restraint, power held back by will, not weakness. On the flagship's command bridge, The Terran crest glowed faintly as an amplified transmission beamed into the council chamber, and Rowan Hale appeared again. Calm, steady, terrifying, not because of anger, but because he looked like a man who carried the weight of an entire species and still stood tall. His voice echoed through every corner of the chamber. Across every ship, across every empire, this is the strength you dismissed. This is the capability you ridiculed. This is the unity you called weakness. He gestured to the window where the Terran fleet floated like a sleeping god, then said, "We moved alone. We fought alone. We survived alone. But do not mistake isolation for inferiority. Humans rise fastest when they stand alone." And the ambassadors felt those words pierce through their pride like knives. Then Rowan leaned slightly forward, his eyes filled with a solemn warning that made even hardened soldiers shiver. "We will save your worlds. But the galaxy will not survive another failure to listen." Suddenly the Terran fleet shifted in perfect synchronization, an elegant maneuver so impossibly uniform that it looked like a single organism circling the council planet. And the movement alone was enough to make every species understand that this was not a show of power. This was a promise, a declaration, a statement carved into the fabric of space. Humanity was no longer the species the galaxy mocked. Humanity had risen, not in violence, not in rage, but in quiet, absolute dominance. And their message echoed across 1,000 worlds like the first heartbeat of a new era. We stand now. And we do not stand small. As the Terran fleet circled the Council's homeworld like a silent ring of judgment. The final blow to galactic pride came quietly, not in fire but in mercy, when hundreds of human medical ships emerged from behind the colossal dreadnoughts, their soft blue lights spreading through space like dawn breaking after a long night. And every species watching felt a strange mixture of hope and dread because these ships did not look like machines of war. They looked like lifeboats sent by a species that refused to let another civilization die even after being humiliated by them. The council chamber erupted with panicked cries for aid as their own worlds burned with plague, and Rowan Hale's voice returned, calm and steady, echoing through the galaxy as he said, "We will save them." And those simple words shattered the last piece of resistance in the council, because humanity had every reason to abandon the galaxy, every reason to let them suffer, every reason to say, "You gave us mockery, so we give you silence." Yet humanity chose compassion over revenge, strength over ego, unity over hatred. Terran medical ships descended on infected council worlds, deploying nanobot swarms that purified the air, dismantled plague cells, healed organs cell by cell, reversed mutations, and revived dying populations within hours, while human soldiers carried supplies, human scientists directed planetary quarantines, human doctors worked without rest, and across 1,000 worlds where aliens once mocked humanity as lesser, crowds now dropped to their knees, crying as human medics saved their families, whispering prayers of gratitude to the species they once ridiculed. In the council chamber, delegates watched live feeds of their people being rescued by Terran hands, and for the first time, they cried, not in fear, not in shame, but in shattered humility, realizing that the species they dismissed as weak had become their only salvation. Rowan Hale, standing in the center of the chamber with the entire Terran fleet behind him, spoke with the calm certainty of a man carrying universal truth. This plague was older than any of us. It was hidden in your archives. We recognize now that you feared it once, and your fear made you blind. The chamber fell silent as he continued, but humanity does not fear the dark. We study it until we learn how to light a fire. Millions heard these words across the galaxy, and even soldiers aboard disabled warships felt something stir in their hearts. Respect, the kind only earned through fire and sacrifice. As the last infected council worlds were cured and the plague molecule dissolved into harmless dust under Terran nanotech, the skies above those planets lit with the blue glow of human ships leaving orbit, their engines humming like a quiet promise that humanity would not abandon the galaxy, only teach it. The council chairwoman, once arrogant and mocking, now stepped forward with trembling hands and bowed her head, not out of protocol but out of genuine awe, and whispered, "We owe you everything." But Rowan only replied, "You owe us nothing. You owe your people the truth, that humanity was never weak." And then he added the final line that echoed like prophecy across every corner of the galaxy. "We asked for help and you laughed. We stood alone and survived. We rose not because you supported us, but because you abandoned us." With that, the Terran fleet slowly pulled back from Council space, ships rotating in impossible synchronization, engines igniting like stars waking from centuries of sleep, and as they vanished into the dark, every species who witnessed that departure understood they had seen not just a fleet, not just a cure, not just a miracle. They had seen the rise of a power the galaxy had underestimated for too long, and from that day forward, no empire, no council, no world ever dared to call humans lesser again, because humanity had proved a truth older than the stars themselves. When humans stand alone, they do not fall. They ascend. And when they ascend, the galaxy follows.